Chapter 9. Packard. Late summer was usually the time we had the most food to eat. But with our grain gone and our garden raided, it was shaping up to be a hungry year. I hated to think how we'd manage over the winter if Tupolev never paid us. We needed to leave here and start a new life, but without money, we couldn't get our papers or our tickets. School in the village only went to 7th grade, so at least I was done with that. I spent a lot of my time foraging in the woods for mushrooms and greens. Slavko, Yulia, and I also visited the orchard as often as we could, scouring the trees for late fruit. Every mushroom, every apple made a difference. Mama and Tato hunted and fished, and they set up a smokehouse to process what they caught so it would last through the winter. Auntie Paulina was busy pickling and preserving anything we could get our hands on, anxious to make sure what little we had would keep through the winter. I caught up with Ruslana to see if things had gotten any better at the Kohots. "Have they paid you yet?" "No," she said. "Our meals are small, and instead of our annual lump sum, we got a listing of our expenses. We were charged for room and board, washing our clothes, and so on. After it was all deducted, we got a big fat zero." I tried to think of a way that I could make some money, but there were no odd jobs to be had, and even if there were, they'd bring in kopecks, not rubles. I felt powerless. But then a partial solution came from the most unlikely source. I came home carrying a handful of freshly foraged mushrooms one afternoon, and was surprised to see a magnificent automobile parked in front of our house. I couldn't help but stare at it because this automobile had nothing Soviet about it. On its silver-colored grille were the letters P-A-C-K-A-R-D in English script. It had fancy spoke-rimmed tires and a canvas roof that looked like it could open up. The car was covered in dust, but I ran a finger through the dirty film, and underneath it was painted a glossy black. I peered through the front window and looked at the polished wood steering wheel, the gear shift, and the leather seats. Was it owned by a person and not the government? And why had the person who drove a car like this decided to come to our house? Just then, the door to our house opened and Mama stuck her head out. "I thought I heard you out here, Neil," she said. "Come inside." Sitting at our table were Comrade Alice and her father, as well as Tato. In the middle of the table was the smallest camera I had ever seen. I sat down across from them and said, "Good afternoon, comrades."
"It's good to see you, Neil,"
said Comrade White.
"I've been trying to convince your father to come to Kharkiv for some temporary work. They're in desperate need of construction workers for the Kharkiv tractor plant,"
said Tato.
"But I told him that with my bad back, such work would kill me."
"What about me?" I asked. "I'm finished school, I'm strong, and I'm a good worker." "Neil," said Mama, coming over to the table with mugs of mint tea. "I don't want you working at a dangerous job like that."
"Here's a map, Comrade Chorny, in case you change your mind."
Had Comrade White just totally ignored me? He unfolded a paper map and spread it out on the table for my father, who had already said he didn't want to go.
"Here's Falivka, and here's the road."
He traced his finger along the road and then railway tracks.
"Here's the tractor factory construction site. You'll see it and hear it a long time before you get to it because it's huge."
"What would happen if—" I began. "Neil," Mama said, "go check on Kokanka, now." Our baby calf did not need checking. Mama just wanted me to stop talking. I looked over to Alice and said, "Would you like to see Manka's calf?" Her eyes lit up. "I'd love to," she said. She followed me out the door. As soon as we were out of earshot, I turned to her and said, "Did you know our priest and Holy Mother were murdered by your group, and our church was torn down?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "That wasn't my group," she said. I can't help it if other activists and the military come to the same villages that we do. It was you who made the inventory list, though, I said, and that killed my uncle. A wave of horror passed over her face. What do you mean? Chort shot Uncle Ilya. They kicked my aunt and baby cousin out of their house. Chort lives in their house now. How is that my fault? She asked. All I did was note down what each household owned. It was up to the local authorities to decide what was fair. Was it you who reported my aunt and uncle's folk song project? I did, she said. I thought it was very interesting what they were doing. You shouldn't have done it, I said. They burned all their handwritten notes. Oh, she said, looking down at her feet. That's terrible. She was quiet for a moment, and I even thought she might apologize. But then she looked up at me and said, Everyone's suffering with Stalin's 5-year plan. But our sacrifices in the end will all be worth it. It doesn't look like you're suffering much, I said. Driving here in a fancy car like that? You've even got an expensive camera. Papa bought the camera used, and it's a borrowed car, she said. The factory is in desperate need of workers to help with construction, so people like you will get tractors. My father and I have been driving around the countryside, trying to convince as many people as we can to come to the construction site. I would go. We desperately need the money, but your father ignored me, and Mama thinks I'm too young. You might be too rude to go, but you're not too young. I've seen men, women, kids, old ladies finding jobs there. I think my father doesn't want to contradict your mother. He was probably giving your father the map for your benefit as much as your father's. I was too angry to respond. I stomped around to the back of our house and found Kokanka and Manka in the pasture munching on grass. I squatted so I was at eye level with the calf, then scratched her between the ears. Hello there, sweetie, I said to her. I know you don't need me at all. Mama was just using you as an excuse to get rid of me. Alice crouched down beside me and reached out to pat Kokanka on the bridge of her nose. I couldn't help think that it would serve her right if Kokanka bit her. But irritatingly, the calf seemed to enjoy the attention. Alice looked over to me and said, I am very sorry about what happened to your uncle and the priest and his wife. I was about to tell her that the damage was already done, but just then, Slavko appeared. Alice, he said, you came here in that car? Can you show it to me? I can do better than that, she said. I'll get my father to take you for a short ride. Slavko grinned. That would be wonderful, he said. Alice and her father stayed for another half hour or so, and Comrade White did take Slavko and Yulia up and down the road in his automobile, with Slavko standing on the running board and Yulia sitting in the passenger seat. He invited me too, but I was still in a bad mood and didn't want to look that eager. So instead, I just watched, standing beside Alice, and that gave me a chance to cool down. Maybe you think I'm rude, I said, but our whole life has been turned upside down, again. I know all about lives being turned upside down, said Alice. It's been an adjustment for me coming here, all the way from Canada. In what way? I asked. When Papa took the job at the tractor factory in Kharkiv, I had to go with him, said Alice. But I left behind Grandma and my best friend, Emily, and my swing hanging from the oak tree behind our house. Now, instead of going to a show with Emily or helping Grandma in her hair salon, I live in a cramped rooming house in Kharkiv, and we march and make lists. Why did you leave? I asked. There are no jobs in Canada since the market crashed. Coming here sounded perfect. Papa getting a job and us helping Stalin build a world where everyone is equal. Do you still think it's perfect? I asked. She sighed, then whispered, No. Comrade White wanted to get a photograph of our whole family standing in front of our house, so Yulia, Slavko, Mama, Tato, and I all lined up. Auntie Paulina, with Tanya in her arms, initially stood at the side of the road and watched, but we called for her to join us. She was our family too. We all looked at the camera and smiled. After Alice and Comrade White left, I realized how ironic it was that she and her father had come here in the hopes of a better life. Yet my family needed to leave here for the exact same reason. Over supper, the conversation was all about the Harkyu tractor plant. I tried to convince Mama that I should go and work on the construction site. We needed the money. And even if I worked there for just a few weeks, we'd probably have enough money to at least apply for our travel documents. That would be one step toward our goal. But Mama was adamant. I don't want you to work in such a dangerous place. Tato looked like he wanted to say something, but Mama gave him a look. And no one in my family argues with Mama once she's made up her mind. That night, after everyone was asleep, Slavko tapped me on the shoulder and whispered in my ear, I think you and I should both go to Harkyu and help build the tractor factory. We'd get twice as much money that way. Our family needs the money, and I'm desperate to see the factory. I almost argued that he was only 9 years old and he'd miss a lot of school, but I wouldn't do that to Slavko. I knew how it felt to be underestimated. Maybe he was my baby brother, but he was as tall as I was, a strong worker, and as smart as any adult. Besides, we needed the money. The next day, when no one was looking, I took the map out of Tato's pocket and stuck it in my own, beside the piece of paper Roman had given me with the teacher's name and address on it. Slavko and I packed the bare necessities and left our bundles hidden in the barn. Once everyone was asleep, I set a note on the kitchen table explaining our plans, and we left. Mama would be furious at first, but in time, I hoped she'd understand that we were both doing what we felt was best for our family.